Welcome back to the second segment of the show, NTV exclusive. I am your host, Abul Hasnath. I'm with my guest, Tariq Hussain here. We're going to go straight back into it because we've got so much to talk about. For those of you that want a quick recap on the first segment, we looked at Tariq Bhai's, as a freelance journalist, some of the stuff that he did in the sporting world. We touched on that slightly, then we went straight into his travels and sort of his research into the heritage of Islam across Europe, and mainly, and we actually started in Western Europe, even though we touched on the fact that he was able to stop off at Cyprus and go and see the Sahabi's grave, Ummi Haram, who was the aunt of Anas ibn Malik, for those of you that are aware of your Sahabas and your the companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But yes, I'm going to go straight in, come straight back to you, because there's a big item in the middle that we seem to have completely flown over, and I mean this award that you've won here. I mean, that relates to one of your journeys. Tell us all about it.
So it really goes back to, it wasn't that long ago, last summer, the summer of 2015, I took my family off to the Baltic, which, to people who are watching that may not know, are the collection of countries known as Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia. And we wanted to go out there because we just love exploring weird, wonderful places. But before I went out there, I started to do my research, and we were going to spend 2 weeks in a camper van, traveling around. And I began to do my research almost a year in advance. And to my absolute astonishment, I discovered that Lithuania had been hiding a 600-plus-year-old Muslim community.
Wow.
That had made its way there way back at the invitation of one of the Grand Dukes of Lithuania in the medieval era. Wow. And so, to my astonishment, not only had they arrived there, their descendants and great ancestors were still there now. So of course, you know, this was like one of the biggest coups that I'd come across, because the history we spoke about before the break, all the Mediterranean history, all the Muslims that lived in that area are no longer there. Well, the Muslims that are there now are modern Muslims who have either arrived in a recent flow of immigrants or are converts. So to go to Lithuania and find these Muslims who were descended, 6 centuries, 7 centuries back was phenomenal. And they're known as Tatars. Right. So they were Crimean Tatars, and the picture that's coming up is of 3 women who are villagers from one of the Lithuanian Tatar villages that I visited, which was an original encampment where the soldiers used to live, and it developed into this village. And this is out in the Lithuanian countryside. Now their story is phenomenal, but what happened was, when I wrote the story, which is coming up now on the screen, I wrote the article for the BBC. And when I wrote the article for the BBC, I happened to mention that there's a slim possibility that descendants of that community had turned up in America at the turn of the 19th century and potentially built a mosque that could still be there. And it turns out...
So you only speculated it?
Well, I kind of said it might be the oldest surviving mosque. I knew it was there, but I didn't know too much about it. So when I interviewed the individual who was still running it, it's not functioning as a mosque as such now. It's more functioning as a community space. But it turns out it is the oldest surviving mosque still in America that is still standing.
Let's bring that back up again. So coming up for you now, on the left-hand side is... that's the Baltic Mosque.
That's right. So that's
and on
in
the right-hand side, that is that's the mosque in New York.
And if you flick to the next picture,
yeah,
you will see that literally this is an actual where I've put the 2 mosques together. So this is a mosque just south of Vilnius, which is the capital of Lithuania, on the left there, and you can see the Imam with his son there. Okay, so that's in Lithuania, and on the right is the mosque in Brooklyn, and you can see the similarities. Wow. So these guys went there and they converted the house. That was a church on the right. That was a church. So they converted it, and they put that little minaret thing at the top so that it reminded them of home. And so when I wrote the article, obviously it was on the BBC website, and it was one of the most popular historical documents they'd ever published at the time. It was getting ridiculous amounts of hits. Came out on New Year's Day, and a radio producer got wind of it, and he contacted me and said, so this American mosque, what can you tell me about it? One thing led to another. We started to discuss things, and I'd never done radio up to this point. And so he said to me, would you be interested in doing something? We spoke to the BBC. We had a coffee out in Soho somewhere. I told him my idea. He spoke to the BBC. And within a couple of weeks, I found myself flying off to America to record what turned out to be a 2-part award-winning radio documentary for the BBC World Service. And it was basically covering America's mosques.
And lo and behold, the New York festivals.
Yes. So when the documentary aired on the BBC World Service, not only did it become the podcast of the week, it then also got nominated for, shortlisted for 2 awards, one of which you're holding. So that was the one that it actually won. So it was voted the best religious radio program for 2016 at the New York Festival's Radio Awards in NYC in July.
Wow.
But also it was shortlisted for the AIBs, which are the Association of International Broadcasters, in the creative radio feature as well. So, you know, both very, very prestigious awards for this.
I mean,
show.
I was going to say, even the AIBs, let's not just brush over that, because I mean, to be shortlisted is an achievement itself. I mean, didn't win that, but I think it's still, that's a huge achievement in itself to be shortlisted.
Well, just the fact that, you know, it was my debut effort. I'd never done radio, so it actually blew me away, you know, absolutely blew me away. And but also the stories that we were telling, you know, it's a really, really important time now in the US for Muslims. You know, I went and I didn't just meet the old Muslims, and we've got a picture here of some of the early Baltic Muslims that went out to America, and you will see they look American. They look as American as I'm sure, you know, the current president's ancestors did. You know, they look as American as any American you're likely to meet. And so we wanted to tell that story. We wanted to point out that Muslims in America just look like every other American there is. But then we also, in the second part, went on to a few other mosques. And, you know, you will see that here is actually a picture of one of the old ones as well. Now, this particular mosque, we're talking to the imam there, but the mosque he's inside was actually built by Syrians. Wow. Which of course is very topical right now. So they were also amongst the earliest Muslims to go over, and they went there again at the turn of the 19th century. We're talking the late 1800s. And they went and built a mosque, and that particular mosque was built with the help of Christians, which is beautiful, because they were Syrian Christians, Syrian Muslims who worked together. But the next mosque that you're going to see, the next picture you're going to see, is where we started to go off in the second part of the documentary, and we were speaking to different Muslims in other mosques in America. So not the ancient ones, the more recent ones. And that particular picture was a mosque that was built with the support of Malcolm X. Now, this is a little bit of black Islamic history. Now, the trouble we have when we're trying to tell the black Islamic history is that most of it was, of course, deleted. So the earliest black Muslims that would have come to America would have been slaves. But unfortunately, when they came over to America, as Malcolm X's story tells you, their names were stripped from them. Their entire identity was stripped from them. And so we don't really know, without some real archaeological and, you know, hard academic research, we don't really know those stories. So we tried to tell as much of the story as we could through the experiences of the modern black Muslims. You know, we also visited a Bangladeshi mosque, as I told you, you know, in the kind of Tower Hamlets of New York, around Jackson Heights, very aptly named Shah Jalal Mosque. And we visited one other mosque, which was really interesting, and that was the mosque where we met white Muslims. Now, interestingly, that particular mosque was actually led by a woman. Okay. So, you know, the aim of the program wasn't just to show Muslims that, you know, practiced Islam in maybe the way that some of us only agree with. We wanted to show the whole spectrum. We wanted America to hear, and the world to hear, that in the West, there are Muslims of all different types of varieties, you know. And so, yeah, it was a phenomenal experience. And the great news is, the BBC want us to go back. Wow. So this is also a bit of an exclusive, on NTV exclusive. So I haven't even announced this on my social media or anything yet. But I got news recently from my producer, who's the picture that you've got in front of you there, that the BBC World Service wants us to go back out to America in the second part of this year and just follow up with some of these Muslims, you know?
It's amazing that the time and what's gone on in America quite literally yesterday. with the sort of inauguration of Donald Trump, that there is still a hardcore sort of inquisitiveness of Islam in America, and the fact that they've actually invited you back over. If anything, I think this time round is going to be, even though they always say the first one's the hardest, the second one's easier, I feel as though it's going to be even more tougher for you with the current climate of going over and actually doing this. And I mean, you've already exclusively told us that you're going to go and do this, but I'm just wondering, have you already toyed with a game plan on how you're going to do this?
Well, of course, we had to have a pitch, so we had to convince the World Service to let us go over there. We had to convince them it was worth doing. And a lot of it is going to focus on the fact that we're going to do a follow-up with a lot of the Muslims who weren't expecting Trump to become president. Okay, so that's going to be a big part of it. We're going to visit some of the Muslims we visited last time, but we're also going to visit a very interesting group of Muslims to give the show another, dynamic. We're going to visit a group of white Muslims living out in the West Coast, who are almost a byproduct of the 60s hippie movement. So these are Muslims who were originally maybe a part of that 60s hippie movement where they were experimenting with ideologies, they were experimenting with a whole heap of other stuff, and they found themselves within the fold of Islam, and they found it very attractive. They adopted it, and since then they've had children who were born Muslim. And so we're going to go and meet this whole community, we're going to speak to them, and we're going to try and give them a platform as well, so that Americans can see that there are so many types of Muslims out there, and some of them, they're born white American Muslims.
It's funny because I know across the internet they actually refer to them as the Muslim hippies, but that's not a chosen name for them, or is it?
No, I mean it's probably something that there's actually quite a few Facebook groups where you see that Muslims are quite proud to be called hippies, because central to many of the hippie ideologies, I suppose you could argue, is a lot of the kind of Islamic ideologies of keeping away from the material, not having too much of a connection with dunya and the world, and not seeing material goods as the be all end all, exuding love and promoting good healthy relations. So a lot of that stuff actually, it sits well with the kind of Islamic philosophies. And I think that's one of the reasons why those people who initially really felt quite attracted to the hippie movement may have seen those parallels in that brand of Islam that you and I might call spiritual Islam, and obviously some people will call it Sufism and things like that. Yeah. So you can see why it was attractive.
Of course. We're going to go for a break, but just to recap on what we've had there, and just to finish up, you can see that Islam brings in people in many shapes and forms, and that is one amazing way. The fact that you look at a hippie and think this guy's going nowhere. I mean, we would still look at it on TV today. Look at one of the 80s programs. Think, God, hippies, they're losers, but actually, it seems like something's brought them in. We've got so much more to talk about. I can't keep going on about it. I'm going to let this gentleman finish up in the final segment. We need to talk about more, and especially what he's looking forward to in 2017. So don't go away. We'll see you very shortly.